Okay, so we are now live on YouTube. Thank you everyone for being here. So this event is being recorded and live streamed on the ArchAgenda channel on YouTube. My name is Daniela Girdovich, and I'm the curator of the ArchAgenda Debates series at the Chicago Architecture Biennial. ArchAgenda is a program partner of the Chicago Architecture Biennial since 2015. And this year's ArchAgenda Debates theme is focused on radical innovation in the area of cyber-urban incubators in the blockchain metaverse. Today, it is my great pleasure and honor to have Patrik Schumacher with us, and he will deliver a keynote that is titled Design Drivers in the Metaverse. Today's event continues a series of free online events that will occur every Saturday from now until December 4th, starting at 11 a.m. Central Time. This year's series kicked off with a two-day symposium that you can find on the ArchAgenda YouTube channel titled ArchAgenda Debates, Cyber-Urban Incubators in the Blockchain Metaverse. And the following is an exciting lineup of events that are coming up. On November 6th, we have Alicia Nachmad and Shejay Bhushan presenting their academic and professional research on realizing cyber-physical communities. On November 13th, SOM is presenting a Pachacucha-style set of presentations and a panel discussion titled SOM, a Laboratory of Innovation, or a Laboratory for Innovation, excuse me. On November 20th, Theodorus Spyropoulos is joining us, and he's going to also be delivering a keynote. And on November 27th, Jimenez Lai and Stephen M. Johnson are presenting in the context of a theme loosely focused on manga-influenced storyboarding for possible futurisms. And then finally, on December 4th, we have Design Morphine presenting their new online master's program in advanced computation. Please visit the Chicago Architecture Biennial event calendar for registration details about the ArchAgenda events this year. So just to give you a brief overview about the overall agenda of radical innovation of this series of events. The fluidity, mobility, and dynamism of 21st century network society is transforming the way we design cities. Current societal paradigm shifts are marked by an intensification in systems of communication, complexity, coevolution, responsiveness, and freedom. Urban design innovation is accelerated by the convergence of natural and artificial intelligence, the emergence of distributed peer-to-peer computational networks such as blockchain, advancements in telecommunications, the explosion of real-time decision systems using big data and AI, and the movement towards knowledge economies anchored by research and development. In this context, the world can be viewed as a laboratory, and entrepreneurship in the open market may be the best avenue for creating material freedom and improving the quality of life for the greatest number of people. As I said, the 2021 edition of ArchAgenda Debates is focused on cyber-urban incubators in the blockchain metaverse. Metaverses are most commonly described as gamified virtual reality worlds in which users interact with 3D computer-generated environments and others in real time. But in a broader sense, perhaps Matthew Ball's description of the metaverse, meaning the one metaverse, which he foresees will emerge over the next 2 decades, may better frame the radical societal transformations that it'll bring about. And what he says is that the metaverse is an expansive network of persistent, real-time, rendered 3D worlds and simulations that support continuity of identity, objects, history, payments, and entitlements, and can be experienced synchronously by an effectively unlimited number of users, each with an individual sense of presence. But he also adds that commonly the metaverse is misdescribed as virtual reality. In truth, virtual reality is merely a way to experience the metaverse. To say that virtual reality is the metaverse is like saying that the mobile internet is an app. The ArchAgenda Debates aim to spark lively and candid exchange on 21st century societal and architectural paradigm shifts, fueled by globally distributed cloud communities, emerging economies, new governance models, novel design agendas, and innovative technologies that transforms social synergies, entrepreneurial opportunities, and ultimately the process of designing cities. So since Patrik does not need an extensive introduction, rather than telling you his extended biography, which you can find on the event registration website and also on Wikipedia, among many other places online, I want to highlight some of Patrik's achievements and to tell you a few anecdotal touch points about him as the architect and teacher that I considered as the most profoundly influential on my own thinking, both in architecture and society. So Patrik Schumacher is an architect and architectural theorist. He is the principal of Zaha Hadid Architects, one of the most innovative architecture practices in the world. He joined Zaha Hadid in 1988, and in 1996, he founded the London-based Architectural Association's Design Research Lab, known as AADRL, together with Brett Steele, and he continues to serve as one of its co-directors. Patrik studied philosophy and architecture at Bonn, London, and Stuttgart, where he received his diploma in architecture. He completed his PhD at the Institute of Cultural Science, Klagenfurt University, and he has been teaching at various architectural schools in Britain, continental Europe, and the USA since 1992. In 2011, Patrik published the first volume of his magnum opus, The Poised of Architecture, subtitled A New Framework for Architecture, followed by the second volume in 2012, subtitled A New Agenda for Architecture. He has published over 100 articles about architecture and parametricism and frequently delivers public lectures all over the world. So just to give you a few touch points, I've been teaching and practicing for about 20 plus years. And also currently I'm a PhD candidate at the European Graduate School under the supervision of Patrik. My first encounter with Patrik, though, was at a lecture I attended called Intensive Fields at USC in 2010, which kind of blew me away, that lecture. This was shortly after Patrik coined the phrase parametricism, which broadly coheres a framework of design and theoretical trajectories that were pervasive since the 1990s. But this was also slightly before the publication of his first volume of the Poised of Architecture. And I recall a slide that I took a picture of. Actually, there were two screens side by side, and he had a slide that had a black background and one white word on it that was nature with an exclamation point. And later I learned that Patrik is great at both highly elaborate theoretical articulation and also creating memorable slogans reminiscent of Wittgenstein's potent brevity. So this slide really stood out in my mind for a long time. In that lecture, I was really struck by Patrik's seamless movement between theory, practice, and academia. And also, of course, the amazing projects of Zaha Hadid Architects and also students at AADRL that exemplify parametricism. At the time, I had started teaching in a brand new graduate program and was eagerly searching out design trajectories emerging from robust theoretical frameworks to anchor our novel curriculum. And Patrik's writings really offered that kind of framework. Coincidentally, I was also assigning and lecturing about a book called Corporate Fields, which is an early compendium of projects from Patrik's studios at AADRL. And at the time, I did not even know the degree to which Patrik was instrumental in cohering and steering the Architectural Association's Design Research Lab. I realized much later that many projects that I was stumbling on in various publications that I was most interested in were in fact either AADRL students or alumni. So in 2013, I finally worked up the courage to contact Patrik, initially via Facebook, where he was conducting really interesting, long discursive discussions, and found to my delight that he is a very approachable, friendly person without airs of superiority, despite his global stature as a leading figure in 21st century architecture. And so began an amazing conversation that a few months later led me to begin my PhD studies in a new program at the European Graduate School, specifically because I wanted to study with Patrik. In the first year of my studies, I read the 2 volumes of the Autopoiesis of Architecture, which again, I found completely mind-blowing, very complex and yet very clear, inspiring motivational theory that and set of agendas that basically make you want to go and design something new. But long before that, in architecture school in the 90s, I was tremendously inspired and influenced by Zaha Hadid's work, which was, of course, also Patrik's work. The 1990s was a watershed moment of intense theoretical acceleration, coupled with novel, innovative experiments in architectural and urban design, transitioning out of modernism via deconstructivist discourse, coupled with extraordinary design manifestations unlike anything that preceded. In the midst of that was also the rise of computational design experimentation with soft forms that I was initially introduced to as folding while studying with Greg Lynn and Doug Garofalo. I believe that we're in a similarly unique moment of intense acceleration on both design and theoretical fronts as we approach the potential to actualize the blockchain metaverse. So this personal set of anecdotes is a way of saying that in addition to the amazing projects that Patrik leads at Zaha Hadid Architects, he has also inspired, mentored, and shaped the design and intellectual practices of countless architects around the world, seamlessly melding research, practice, academia, and theoretical discourse. In 2015, I was inspired by the Autopoiesis of Architecture to form ArchAgenda in order to kick off the first round of ArchAgenda Debates at the inaugural Chicago Architecture Biennial. The first ArchAgenda Debates was subtitled Setting the Agenda for 21st Century Architecture and Design. And Patrik kicked off that event together with Peter Eisenman, Jeff Kipnis, Theodore Spyropoulos, and Rainier de Graaf. And you can find those videos on archagenda.com. I invite you to peruse those videos. Also in 2015, Vit Jedlička established the world's newest micronation, Liberland, and I'm very grateful to Patrik for inviting me initially to get involved in curating Liberland's design competitions, which led more recently to the Liberland Metaverse that I have the honor of participating in brainstorming. And I think Patrik is going to touch on that project today. About 18 months ago, Patrik started talking about cyberspace sort of as the next evolutionary frontier in parametricism, which actually started with the pioneering visions about the internet in the 1990s, which was originally imagined as a spatial interactive experience in real time. And Patrik has some early projects that were focused on that. So the digital acceleration during the pandemic, coupled with pervasive remote working and socializing together with the evolving gaming technologies, formed a perfect storm for the rise of the metaverse. Recently, Patrik posted about the metaverse in a piece that began with the following phrase: "When thinking deeper fires up enthusiasm, theory becomes poetry." The Patrik's theoretical writings form an instrumentalizing framework that is anchored in a very broad societal perspective emerging from both historical materialism and Niklas Luhmann's systems theory of society. His writings motivate in a way that quickly accelerates one's thinking from enthusiasm into active design trajectories. And in this way, his inspiring theories can indeed also be construed as poetry. It is my great pleasure and honor to introduce Patrik.
Hi, everybody. Thanks a lot for this very nice introduction with a lot of nice anecdotes and memories. And thanks again for giving me that platform to talk about the metaverse. It's really something which has been exciting me in recent months, and we're getting our hands into it. There's so much going on. I'm going to review a bit what's going on in the space and what might be critical success criteria and design drivers for the metaverse design, and some glimpses of what we are sketching out right now. I mean, that is a bit compressed and shorter than, because we've been showing that last week already. So let me try to share my screen. Wait, can you give me the right to share? Is it? Wait, yeah, I think it can. Yeah.
I think you can.
Yeah. Okay. Now it works. Great. Thanks.
We see your screen.
Okay. There's some panel I have to click away. Let's see. Let's start. Yeah. So design drivers for the metaverse. So I will take the view of the designer, and it's great as architects we are well placed to step forward for that next phase of the web, which we can maybe call the immersive internet. So, and of course the background is why we're doing this. It's just been incredible, powerful in terms of increasing world division of labor in the global knowledge economy, and that means productivity, material freedom increasing massively. And as Adam Smith said, the extent of the division of labor allows a deeper and more intricate division of labor, and therefore and that's the size of the market in a way, and collaborative network is a huge factor. And I think that so the internet, of course, has been amazing, and the metaverse can do new things and empower and further expand world division of labor and communication. So I think that's the background, and as part of this whole discourse of post-world network society with all this innovation and research flowing and having potential to be translated. So the technological systems we have now have an enormous and nearly infinite capacity to absorb new innovations, and everybody can participate. And this permissionless element to that, I think, is also fascinating. So wait, this doesn't transport. Now we're going. Yeah, so I call it the metaverse. I mean, it's the same. So it used to be called cyberspace. It is now tinged with the whole integration with maybe blockchain technology and the fantastic cryptocurrency and crypto ecosystems, because it will also become a space not only of interaction and communication, but also of commerce, exchange, etc. So that immersive internet, that metaverse, I think the key features and drivers is, first of all, it's focused on communication, more on real-time communicative interaction than the web, which is more in information storage, text-based, etc. I think that the metaverse also will deliver this interface expansion, this 360-degree layered dynamic interface, which you're going to be inhabiting. And I've been talking about the built environment as a 360-degree layered interface all around us in layers, and that now brought home, I think, for internet access, not only mutual urban kind of access. I think that important feature and issue is an improvement is the browsing navigation, which that unleashes. The intuitive exploration via city or architecture analogies of that world of interaction, which is the web, which is information space, which much more all the other interacting partners potentially and where they're located in the institutions, that they unfold, and that we can compress more into each vista, and we can dynamically kind of navigate that rather than having scrolling down menu lists or knowing an address and typing that. So that browsing navigation, I think, is a big plus. You can still obviously type and search and have our eyes recommending you things. And I think this interaction richness is increasing this way, because you have a density of simultaneous interaction offerings and choices in view or quickly coming into view as you shift your perspective, as you move deeper into the layers, etc. So I think this is this empowerment. I think we're going to achieve, we're going to be more networked, and we're going to achieve more satisfying choices. We're going to be able to participate better and deeper and faster with more diversity and richness. So this is the kind of architecture which is sometimes called 360-degree interface of communication. You can see how on all these levels, there's maybe activity, maybe an office or co-working place or restaurant, bar, cafe. You might want to know about partake in, and you see where things are, actions are communicating, which might be relevant to you. So the background is clearly this, that we have to remain networked in, plugged in, because what we're working on is so much connected to what everybody else is working on. This recalibration, what we are up to and knowing, has to be absolutely continuous. And if you're 2-3 days switched off, you probably, when you want to plug in, you kind of missed the boat already. You don't know key shifts. Now, in the background, cyberspace. I mean, it's interesting that sci-fi novels and writers are into it. Also, the phrase metaverse came out of Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash, and then there's these early, actually late 80s, speculations of architects, what that mean, and that the architects could be the design discipline that delivers the internet, but it became otherwise. It was the graphic designers, but now it's going to be the architects for the next stage. So I have these kind of 3 theses on the advent of cyberspace. Thesis 1: in the coming age of VR-empowered cyberspace, architects will take over the design of many internet interaction interfaces. Thesis 2: the expansion of architecture's remit will further distill the discipline's core competency, namely the spatial visual ordering of information and communicative interaction. I've been always talking about this. And it's clear that we have to distinguish social functionality, which is the facilitation of communicative interaction, from technological remits, the engineering disciplines we need to be intricately aware of, but that's not our core competency. And we have now, actually the design types is very similar, but it's a total substitution of all relevant technologies and the technology you need to know and what's happening under the hood to generate these, let's say, communicative interfaces. There's a total substitution, and yet the design is more or less stable. That shows that we can continue, and with a whole new set of maybe engineers, which are more about interaction densities per second, polygon counts, and what have you. Anyway, so thesis 2 means it becomes very clear what the core competency of architects are, and actually all designers. All designers are communication designers. So thesis 3, what I also believe, is that the VR-empowered cyberspace will fuse with urban space, implying a radical transformation of built architecture and urban life. So that's what I call the cyber urban incubator. It's this kind of cyber physical fusion. And I don't believe that we're going to sit there and experience the metaverse all, separate in our, cabins with goggles. I'm never wearing these anyway. But that we will collectively, we will be in urban spaces where we have these mixed reality, we have panoramic screens and holograph projections and telepresencing, and we're going to be together with some and with many more virtual presences. So that's what I believe. That's going to be all architectural and urban spaces. So it's a radical transformation. It's not going to be consumed through the mobile phone or the PC screen, nor the goggles, in my view. AR glasses, yes. So anyway, just a little bit of that. History of the internet-based telecommunication, as I'm just showing you our website, there's kind of graphics-based scroll-down menus. It's like based on the newspaper, magazine, and some kind of filing systems. And that now it's a kind of city. And just showing here Decentraland as a kind of example of that, although there's a lot of issues with Decentraland's functioning. So the internet evolves, in front of our eyes, in the domain of graphic designer, based on the analogy of the magazine, towards becoming the domain of architectural designers based on the analogy of buildings, the city. So I'm using Facebook a lot, and I mean, I recognize, it is a framing of communicative interaction, the way you lay this out, or the spatiology, the organization of using space. There is Semiology, you have to make things conspicuous, where you use fat print, there's Semiology, which kind of icons you use, but it's getting confusing quite quickly. And it's, and the same thing, let's say, happens when you look at conferencing, and you have a grid of faces on Zoom, like now, the awareness of who's really there and how many there isn't there. You can't use quick navigation in space to approach somebody to get a better overview. And so there are these kind of conferencing VR spaces. Also, what's great about these, you can have little kind of side conversations, you have after parties, you have intermission chats, etc., green rooms where you can maybe meet the speakers, and that's difficult to have on that kind of graphic screen. So yeah, so that's thesis one. Thesis two, this expansion of architecture's agreement will further distill the discipline's core competency, namely the spatial visual ordering of information and communicative interaction. The semantic charge is the very essence of cyberspaces. So that's what I believe. And wait, okay, sorry, to transport. And, you know, architecture's task has never been really shelter, but always order, social functionality. I've been saying that before, so I'll just put it in writing here. But the important thing here is that order is delivered by communicated demarcations rather than physically enforced physical barriers. Although in the cyberspace, we can also have, you know, degrees. You know, it's going to be intervisibility, interawareness, and free movement largely, and certain filters. And I think we can rely on social protocols that, you know, bust in and disturb interactions. Of course, we could also have electronic barriers and passwords and all of that. So there's a strong analogy here. But it's closed walls and closed cells, I don't think are going to be very popular in cyberspace. So this ordering and communicative framing of communicative interaction is very important, and it's important that this includes framing of online interactions always already. You know, Facebook designers, the interaction and graphic designers are colleagues in the sense having exactly the same task as we have as architects. So this goes as much for web-based virtual event as for, you know, hosting events in design buildings. So I'm saying, you know, all design is in the sense UI, user interface design, user experience design, and architecture is in the way that UX, UI design for 3D environments, both virtual and real. And so I've been using these phrases for a long time. It was just, you know, I used to call it organization, I call it spatiology, then phenomenology, semiology, and I've added recently dramaturgy because it's a lot of things will be animated and interactive. We've been talking about it also in architecture in terms of kinetic transformability. But let's say the content, of course, the client's task is supplying the brief, the events, the institutions, the interaction desires, what they want to offer. And then we have to spatialize that and make sure that the complexity is still maintains, you know, is legible, that the various forms and colors and textures and positionalities mean something and inform you about what's going on where, and then having an interesting, let's say, dramaturgy, which still carries forward semiology. So these are this kind of task dimensions of metaverse designers as much as architects. And what we're going to look for is the spatiological project is going to be complex, and that makes it, you know, interesting. I mean, to kind of develop registers of spatial organization. The phenomenological project is really going to become the task of maintaining perceptual tractability or legibility in the face of this complexity. The semiological project must deliver that information richness and really pack it in so that we get a lot of understanding and information, you know, for the sake of orientation. And then the dramaturgical project offers a lot of interaction potentials with others, but also with the scene itself. So that's the way I see these drivers and the success criteria. And I mean, I'm going to show at the end a kind of urban environment we created, AADRL, which I can kind of, I'm now reinterpreting as a cyber city. So, I mean, it's important that, again, the centrality of communication, I've been talking about this, and in the real built environment, people getting too much bogged down with the technical difficulties. And of course, as architects, we also invested in, you know, geometric coordination and into the detailing and constructability. But why are we doing this? We're actually doing this ultimately because we care about the final surfaces, the touch, feel, aesthetic, the atmosphere, the expressiveness. That's why we're investing these bone-breaking work into the technical. But it's actually other people's responsibilities. So the centrality of communication, but will be very, very evident and obvious when we're talking about cyberspace and the metaverse, because all of that work, which we kind of think is so critical and crucial, which ultimately is engineering responsibility or contractors' responsibility, is totally falling away. But our work is nearly more or less the same, stays in touch, and there's some other, you know, there's a substitution. There's a new set of engineers we now have to interface with. So it's clear what our core competency is. This distillation process is going to be, let's say, unmistakable. And it's the same with product designers, fashion designers, etc. So I think it's going to be great kind of help for my theory of architecture to be kind of becoming compelling. So now going through that, I don't want to go into that at this point into the spatial organization, registers and repertoires. We need to continuously expand, and I have some of this in my writing. You can learn a lot from network theory, for instance, set theory and fuzzy set theories and so on. But I go into phenomenology very briefly, and we have these poles of monotony, which is easy to read, but you no longer know what's inside, or this kind of visual chaos, which is very disorienting and disempowering. And it's easy to make to do something ordering. But what is interesting is that in terms of the way we interface with the metaverse now, let's say this kind of non-spatial metaverse and all the offerings we have through the internet, is at crisis point. I mean, personally for me anyway. So if I go on, if you have too many apps and you can't find them, I'm kind of scrolling back and forth on my iPhone, and I don't find my whatever my Bank of China app. So and that's very, very frustrating, and it's kind of strangely stagnant. And this is just the kind of visual chaos of a differentiated, a manifold of differences which have no order, no relationship between form and content, no structure, no hierarchy, etc. And you simply can't. It becomes kind of oppressive, nearly. And similarly, I think you could say, in some kind of traffic situations, they have similar problems. And in a way, but what is important is, the one way to do it, that you give me at each page, you give me kind of 3 icons, but then I have 50 pages to scroll through. So how are you going to do that? I don't think it's properly studied. I don't know if it is, but I just find it dysfunctional. So you have this option to show a lot, and then there have not so much depth of layering, or you show few things and you have these endless layers of branching. And I think there's going to be more in this direction here, but then you're sort of smoothly increasing the depths, and there must be a logic and an order. It can't just be a kind of randomly assembled manifold. And this is just reflection. And we need Gestalt grouping principles or perceptual tractability issues. How to do things of high importance, how you make them conspicuous in a field, how do you have figure ground separation, and how can you structure figures, clusters, clouds of maybe interaction potentials or icons, or and still have them intersecting and diffusing. How do you maintain a complex trajectory through smooth continuation, for instance, similarity, proximity? I don't want to go too much in detail with it. Look at this, and you'll find, symmetry, closure, etc. These are useful strategies of maintaining legibility in the face of complexity. I also find it interesting that when you move in cyberspace and in real space, you can also have, if you have something differentiated from one perspective against one background, and then against another background, and you don't need to change anything in these icons, they suddenly become the same. So there's the same or differentiated depending on perspective, on context. Even while the element itself is persistent. Same with color, or this perspectival formation of groups of spaces or figures. All of this is now becoming exploitable. So all my themes of making complexity and layeredness and richness of experience somehow legible by phasing it in through observer positions, etc., become relevant for cyberspace. And that for certain audience, or certain perspective, something snaps into view and you can now approach that. And this is urban formations which look different from different sides, but that's all. It's the same formation actually. So it's open at the bottom, or it's open at the top, or it's condensed in the middle, and it's all the same. Let's say, a cluster looked at from different perspective, and if you animate it, and that's another big topic where you have these things continuously transforming as well, that can happen. It can either help to make something conspicuous. You can still maintain, let's say, a sense of object persistence, a moving or transforming object, but you can also have several perspectives on that. And I've been showing these a number of times where you can have differentiation, homogeneity of a field depending on perspective and depending on different users who want to see different things. Because of course we can also tailor the metaverse for particular users. I mean, that's complex and you have to build multiple versions, parametric versions of it. But I think you also have one a stable environment where you use these tricks, which kind of inbuilt tailoring. So semiology, I've been talking about.
I'm sorry, I don't know if your slides are advancing. I don't know if you were showing an image, but we're not seeing it.
What do you see now?
We're seeing the 4 bullet points: the spatiological, project, phenomenological, etc. That's the slide we're on.
God. You should have told me earlier. Wait. So that's, I don't know why they're not advancing. Let me see what we can do about that. No, I've been advancing slides.
You okay? Now
what do you see now?
Now we see your screen with all the slides.
Okay, good. No, yeah. I will not talk over it again. I'll just. So we were okay. Let me just maybe. Okay, maybe I'm just scrolling it through it here. I was talking about, you all have the issue with the impenetrability of your iPhone icon matrix, and the structuration of that through space will help a lot, making things conspicuous, making things hierarchical, making things observer dependent, etc. And in terms of the semiological project, I don't want to go too much into it, but to develop a consistent semiology. Now you have, for instance, all these icons. They have a color, they have various iconographies which tell you nothing about where they belong to relative to each other. And the network of connectedness or grouping and classification is not, they're all individual little shouts and they just generate a cacophony. So there's a task here. Okay, let me see if we can go back to this. Do you see a single slide?
Yes.
It says dramaturgy. Okay, let's see. What are we having now? Do we have an animation?
Yes, it's working.
Great. So I'll go maybe slow. Maybe it was just, I think my laptop is ready for an update. So this is just to show, that I believe, what we've been talking about so many years at AADRL, and which is responsive environments, and now I'm calling it more self-directed, maybe spontaneous environments, this kind of kinetic transformability. Obviously, it does a lot for making the space adaptive with respect to user configurations. The metaverse will have a lot of that. And obviously, it's much easier to implement that. Are you seeing a new image, a new little video?
Yes.
Okay, so we've been thinking, and these are historical documents. They're more than 20 years old, AADRL, some of them. We've been thinking about this, and we have seen interactive installation in the art world for many years. We have seen relatively little of that in the real world, although the demand of it would be there. But it's just, tough and expensive, and so. But I think in the virtual world we're going to have enormous amounts of those. And when you sometimes see on the kind of icon dynamics on a Mac interface, you'll see how this helps actually to track where the thing would go and which icon you're clicking on. It inflates a lot of that in spaces. When you move together, space expands and contracts, becomes more visible. There's a lot of that, I think, animation of the scene, which is going to see in cyberspace. So these are historical documents, AADRL year 2000 or so, or 1999. And so I just wanted to show them this is quite relevant. This will come to fruition. And now, before it will also come into the built environment. Of course, we have these sensors and actuators and all of that, and robotics pressing into the built environment, but we're gonna show the way through the metaverse. And yeah, these are 1999 AADRL theorist. So this idea of having something which at the time already thought of as being AI empowered learning, you know, self-directed, making offerings and being kind of through reinforcement learning, trained to do more or less. And I think the metaverse could equally be important. And there's these beautiful transformations where a partition opens up communication channels, spaces, tables, layout spaces, could be screens. And I think the metaverse will be full of that. And it would be more conspicuous or more structured for that, because we are very sensitive to movement in our kind of visual periphery. So if something, I mean, if everything starts to go crazy, of course not. It needs to be something which just comes close, and if it becomes prominent, then I think we would be drawn to it. But also simply the adaptiveness of spaces to how many people are there. You don't have to have 20 people sitting in a 500, in a 100 people or 200 or 300 people auditorium. This can just compress or expand, and etc. etc. So I think this will be a big component of the metaverse under the heading of dramaturgy. And of course, it's in now interfaces. You click on things, you shift things, you open and close things. And this is more of those historical images from a bit of nostalgia of AADRL responsive environments, whenever this was around 20 years ago. So I'm just clicking forward. There's been a few of those. But it's framing, dynamic framing of the interaction scenarios, and I think that's easy still to maintain, a sense of coherence and persistence through time of the object. I mean, moving objects, but also a lot of chances for adaptiveness and reconfiguration. So, I think we'll see it in the metaverse first, and we'll see it right away, actually. And of course, that we have to study what we've been recently doing, those forms and transformations, always with the interaction. In this case, these could be seen as avatars coming together, finding each other, aggregating around a lecture, seminar, a chat, etc. So I'm now talking about these self-directed responsive learning spontaneous environments. And the architectural agents respond, adapt to human agents' behavior. That's one thing, but architectural agents intervene and prompt when human agents fail to generate desired event patterns. So they break up kind of boring, stagnant situations, and maybe allow, for the chance for more fruitful or more diverse kind of experiences to happen. That could be, the way architectural agents could be facilitators with respect to the hosts and visitors, let's say, agendas. So I believe that there could be this emergent high performance interaction ecology, and you can eventually will have that in real space too, with robotic agents. So is it still okay with the?
Yes, it's working.
Okay, great. That's nice. So we have these kind of 4 task domains, criteria of success, drivers, concerns, which will be very important in the metaverse, and navigability, particularly in the face of complexity. And so when you do large complex building, that's already an issue. And we always do actually 3D models and VR models first. And this is not designed as a metaverse. This is Unicorn Island in Chengdu. We have different versions of that. And it's being constructed. And we're now designing every building of it. I forgot, I don't know how many it is. Maybe it's kind of whatever, 40 buildings, 50 buildings, depending how you count. And it's quite diverse. There's a unity across a variety of designs and morphologies and typologies, which link together to create something. There's this overall, let's say, force field which gives you a sense of where you have to move towards the center, this orientation of the elliptoids, etc. And we later we had to kind of bring more tall buildings into the mix. And I just wanted to show what we have. We developed the VR model, and we're now kind of testing using the VR model, testing the navigability with some test people and giving them a map and showing them a destination spot, and then throwing them into perspective and say, okay, find that. And in perspectival view, you don't necessarily have, sometimes you don't have that destination view, but you have a broad orientation. You have to kind of navigate bifurcations, and maybe this whole thing is too homogeneous, or you try to differentiate, and we're kind of critically investigating the navigability of that, and how many seconds somebody requires to reach a target, for instance, from arbitrary drop-in points of the person, arbitrary kind of destination points. Anyway, these are examples we have, and then we also track, of course, the trajectory, and we're watching out what's in the field of vision, what's in the center of vision, what people are kind of maybe orienting. Usually, probably they're pulled always away from into the more open half of the bifurcation space, etc. I was trying to find out what the rules of maneuver are, and tracking that. And anyway, it's a little experiment. Here's what they've been looking at when they're moving. And so some of these experiments will, of course, will be relevant also in VR or metaverse spaces, purely virtual spaces, to get a handle on kind of testing navigability issues, and then the attempt to, sorry, this is all black, an attempt to develop agent models for testing these environments. So what we've been doing recently for the last 3 years in terms of developing live process simulations, modeling heterogeneous interaction scenarios through agent models, that can apply as well to testing metaverses. Okay, this is all the frames, and measuring up, and then trying to actually have a neural network, a machine learning, using that data set to develop an agent who's then kind of dropped in and finds a path. Okay, I'll jump forward. There's a little research project inside Zaha Hadid Architects, actually the analytics research team. So we also have a little VR department, and this is what they try to do. So it's not only interaction space, but also information spaces. A lot of, for instance, when you're a stock trader, or you're a stock investor, and you want to navigate the stock market, you can do that with your headset or with the more spatialized layout of the various types of information, and they're also dynamically changing, etc. So that's actually what we first looked at when we thought of cyberspace. It was less interaction, it was more spatialized information, so kind of 3D information, graphics, navigable retrieval of destination, which might have been then websites or text or something. Was more the information navigation condition. It's still relevant, but I think in metaverse it will be much more direct experiential interaction with other human beings. Anyway, so that's a little bit from our VR, and this is just the background of all these things which are going on with Second Life. Zuckerberg's idea of what they're doing with Oculus, but also with now this kind of rebranding of Meta with the Horizon projects. It's fascinating, and of course they've been initially it's about socializing with your friends and you build your world and to hang out and chat, but of course they also emphasize in our work environments clearly. And Facebook is, of course, is also all the corporates are there with their pages, and it's a platform for many purposes, and but they have their VR or metaverse will differentiate into work environments, into home environments, and more socializing environments. This is the home office they're proposing, etc. And it's curious that I was, when we thought about the metaverse, I would primarily thought about work environments, communication, conferencing, professional communication, B2B exchanges, socializing, of course, also in the context of knowledge and experience transfer and so on, less entertainment. And I never thought about the home, but maybe there's also a role for the home. And Zuckerberg anyway thinks so, that you invite, it's also socializing. You bring in some people into your, virtual home where you maybe have your NFT collection on display. I don't know. There's something worthwhile thinking about it. And also your home office. And I just don't really talk too much, but there's so many projects out there. I mean, the Fortnite lobby was the first indication that people could use the VR, which is literally built for the shooting game, as a socializing and chat room, and that you can start exchanging. And so there's a bit of all those competitors and projects out there. It's a real explosion of investment of startup companies. There's Decentraland. There's so many with all the events in venues you could have there. I will come later on to some criticism. There's crypto voxels, and just give you a flavor of what these things look like. A lot is focusing on art, a lot of them focusing on socializing, clubbing, etc. in Nosomnium space. And we've looked at that. We studied with all the kind of projects which are out there, and they work, they deliver experiences which become ever more compelling and satisfying. We're not there yet, but one big differentiator will be that the vividness and functionality really of that experience, that it is not tedious, not tiring, that you actually get things done, that it's productive. And most of it is now kind of entertainment, socializing still, etc. But we're working with some people who are already deep into professional communication spaces, exhibition spaces, product launches, etc. Here's just two more. I mean, there's new metaverses kind of being invented and launched, every week. And have a look out there. I mean, it's very vibrant, very booming. And it's interesting how this partially overlaps with the crypto space, which is an incredible explosion. So there will be interesting overlaps there. VR chat spaces. I'm not going to go into that, but I've visited some of those. Is it still some transporting, guys?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, I mean, it's fascinating, watching videos together, watching films or football matches together. I mean, there's so much out there. And a lot of this will aggregate maybe into some kind of major platforms potentially, or they're going to be interlinked, interoperable, maybe into personalized kind of stacks you might move through. So, and I think that Zuckerberg was actually misrepresented. He wants to be highly interoperable. He also talking about crypto and NFTs, and that you bring your assets across. It's not going to be that walled garden that people talk about, but I still believe that Facebook as a proprietary platform will have issues of credibility, of legitimacy, and that kind of decentralized platform in the end, if the experience is strong enough, will be the winning out that race. And there's a fantastic race for winning kind of, early adoption and gaining the network effects early for the metaverses. There's also some get quick rich schemes, I suspect. And there's a lot of these kind of, let's say, professional communication, a lot of events companies rebranded as virtual events companies. And of course, product launches and 3D assets, if you have them digitally, to throw them into an environment where you can roam around, pick them up, look at them, open them up, that's perfect. That's a no-brainer. And that all will happen probably in a metaverse where you can then also locate these in the various industry hubs, which I believe will be in those cities which will win the race, as it were. But I do think that there will be multiple worlds. There will be the worlds for teenager gaming and gambling worlds, and there will be those which are more focused on knowledge economy and professional communication. And you can see that a lot of parametricism has arrived already in some of these products which are out there. I'm not sure if that video runs here. It reminds me of a museum we designed. Anyway, I don't have time to go through all of these. There's MeetingVR is a good one, actually. We've had a lot of, what I find interesting here, it differentiates. It's not just one space. There is different types of meeting. There is conferencing. There is intimate meeting, larger meetings, boardroom meetings, quick stand-up meetings. They have a whole menu of, a whole menu of designs you can choose and tailor as well a little bit. So I think it's interesting that diversity of venues is very important to move between. It's a bit like that agile workspace we also instantiating on the real world, where you have many different types of settings, so different types of occasions, and you roam between them and self-sort into them. And that's very important for that manifold, and that therefore you need kind of these semiological differentiations to understand the character and who is where and what's going on where. You can see the quite rich diversity of types of meeting for how many people, and I believe that they're also going to be, as I said, kinetically transformable. And for that reason, I thought it was quite interesting that diversity of settings, and I think that's realistic. And then when we're talking about our project later in terms of the cyber urban incubator for Lieberland, that's something the lessons we can learn. And anyway, so that I'm just showing you how many companies are out there offering that. It's really a great flourish, and it will be a big shake-up. I don't think all of them can survive. It's a bit like the internet bubble all over again, both in crypto and in the metaverse now, I believe. And there's a lot of this AR overlaying stuff. AR glasses, I believe, is coming. Google glasses were pulled from the market, and behind the scenes have been kind of worked upon, and Facebook has its own version as well. So I think that, and various forms of tele presencing in real spaces, and instead of a screen in the background, you have a panoramic screen. A lot of virtual audience will be layered in, but some of them important. The main speaker, the chairman, the lecturer will come in as a robot, as a holographic projections. I believe that, and this vividness of having gesture, facial expressions coming in, what Zuckerberg was talking about when he's talking about the embodied internet. I think it's very fascinating, and I believe in most of this. I don't believe in monsters and strange avatars for gaming. But these kind of glasses, I think we'll have that, and that means there's a whole world of information graphics overlay to reveal about the various places, various informations. There was this kind of data protection issue and scare with the Google glasses that you look at somebody and face recognition and read their CV. I don't find it so scary. And this is this kind of telepresencing through robots, which I believe this moves into that idea of the cyber urban incubator, where we have actually the fusion, the mixed reality becoming the mood and mode, not at home with their goggles, but you're going to be in there, panoramic screen. Some people are together, some people are robotically present, some people are just projected into the space holographically, or etc. But this is the Microsoft project, and I think it's fascinating. Yeah, this is the way you can also have some kind of AR kind of embodiment projection of that robot, not just a screen. And maybe it's this one, Boston Dynamics, maybe more, where you can actually have the gestures directly played out in a physical embodiment. Maybe too expensive for many, but maybe for some, like Zuckerberg might appear in 10 different places in physical embodiment. A little bit of sci-fi, but of course also interaction, working, collaboration, working together on 3D tools. We've been doing that with our VR team, experimenting with this, and it's another kind of version of working together. Okay, and then there's this kind of, there's this interesting group at the AA called Space Popular, who've been investigating this quite a while. They choose this kind of candy color, neo-pomo. I mean, it's low on polygons. It's maybe graphic. And I'm not dismissing it altogether, but I find it hard. I think it becomes quickly monotonous and doesn't have, I think we have to bring the full-on photorealistic richness, actually for the semiology's sake, for the phenomenology's sake. I don't think, and we can have enhancement temporary, you can have kind of highlighting and glowing and wiggling and so on as well, but I don't think it's going to be that kind of, that abstracted world will not have the information density which we wish. It's just an hypothesis. But some metaverses are going into this direction. So, you know, dense legible information rich environments facilitate orientation, navigation, recognition for interaction, rich experience. That's the formula for both for designing, you know, complex, let's say, real world physical incubator buildings and city institutions and university campuses, as well as metaverses. By the way, the first the kind of Cyberspace project I did at TU Berlin was a virtual college. So universities is an interesting topic because you have so many different disciplines coming together, so many events you might not want to miss, so many players, actors. So it's I think universities will be big, and actually universities were using a Second Life already as venues, and they all went fully online. I mean, I've been teaching AADRL for 18 months on Zoom, and actually AADRL is working on the cyber urban incubator, and I'll show you a bit later some of those things. So if looking at more the cityscape, how are we navigating cities? One thing is of course the singular icon. Let's say there's points, lines, planes, and volumes. So let's call them, these are kind of points, landmarks, and they will give you something, but obviously if you can't have 100 landmarks, and the problem with a lot of the historic ones is that you can see here, you don't know from which directions you're looking at it, so they do not become a compass. And there's only so many you can take, but in terms of our landmarks, usually they are adapted to context sensitive, to environmental, northeast, west sensitive. So this kind of Iraqi central bank landmark is a compass. You know which direction of the city you are, and it also works internally, recognizability. But if icons kill each other at a certain point, so there's limits to that. Lines, and of course the difficulty is the line becomes complex and kinks and jerks around. You might not know which line you're on. But anyway, networks, pass systems, that's something we can look at. And then enclosure, realms within realms, nesting hierarchies. So these are the different spatial ordering devices, as well as recognition devices, concentric arrays and so on, grids, zones, and so on. But then overlap comes in, and that's difficult, and we have invested, and we know how to express and articulate overlap conditions. These kind of psychographic maps you can individualize. Everybody will have a different perception and cognitive map of those structures. Anyway, I don't want to go too much into this, but all this kind of idea of Manhattan, the realm of free play. Yes, you have a lot of freedom, but you very quickly have that problem of the indigestible icon grid. Anyway, so it's useful to look back at the history of architecture, urban design, how one can maintain, how can one build up complexity, use morphology, what's legible, what's illegible. You can even read Kevin Lynch's The Image of the City. Kind of squeezes, gradients of a potent. You have vector of transformation. You can navigate field conditions. All of that will be incredibly relevant for navigating the metaverse as it builds up complexity. So all of that parametric urbanism will come to play, but it's too monotonous, and will be district scale, but urban scale won't. We have cultural districts. This is the idea of multi-author ecosystem of various project nesting coming in, having enough similarity to you belonging to a cluster, at the same time sufficient individuality and internal differentiation, etc. And they still know when one building stops, another starts, but you also know that they belong together to somehow generate a cultural district. So that's what we can learn on my metaphor of the ecology of, let's say, multi-species ecology for the multi-author urban order. And then let's look at, even within one firm, and we've been in a way pushing ourselves to have a large diversity of morphologies, and yet there's a unity across it all, even though it's quite diverse internally in terms of the various materials, morphologies, patterns, colors, expanses, and so on. So there's a richness and diversity, and yet there's a unity, and it's a unity of the endless forms of nature to some extent, because there's a set of underlying morphogenesis principles and the embedding of performance criteria. All of that is very useful, and tectonism, supersedes parametricism and having far more richness, and also a lot of additional cohering algorithms, rule-based orders. I think that's the way to generate it, and I want to show you later what the experiments we've done at AADRL. One of them is this, where we have several of these buildings next to each other creating an urban pattern. They're distinct yet similar enough to be part of an urban district. And then, of course, we have the configuration agenda, and at the same time configuration together with understanding interaction and how one triggers the other. And there's no hierarchy with that. All human movements trigger transformations, but transformations happen spontaneously and drawing human actors into the ambit. You can see here that these different projects, and then the task was also to formulate the interim space. And switch this off. Some of you might have seen that before. Just the, and it was interesting for the metaverse, and these can directly be placed, the metaverse design. Exterior and interior, the elements disappear, but there's still degrees of openness into, publicness, of visibility from everywhere, from public spaces, and then degrees of filtering, of layering and posing and shielding and making more intimate or less public. And on top of this, you have that as a dynamic, continuously transforming. And what I feel, you want to be part of a field where you see many things. If you poke your head out, or if you kind of step out of behind the screen, you have that deep intervisibility, inter-awareness, and you quickly roam around, but then you also have intimacy, in particular the definition of your situation in a field of situations. And they need to be ordered and somehow be kind of field conditions you navigate towards more intimacy, towards more urbanity, up the hierarchy and various, let's say, departmental cohesions. I'm thinking mostly of work environments or conferencing environments, university environments, etc., where it's all about high performance of interaction, maximizing encounters, maximizing communication, maximizing information exchange, collaboration potential, etc. So I don't want to extend this too much, but what is fascinating to me is a lot of this work translates neatly, and we're going to see these transformations first in metaverse. We still in the real world, but I think the real world will follow through. I think what we're going to offer in the metaverse now will become a desire to be inbuilt into the physical, and as these two worlds fuse more and more, one being an overlay onto the other, I think that will fuel a lot of what we've been thinking about in terms of responsible environments, accelerate that through the loop of the metaverse, coming home into that kind of mixed condition. So I'm nearly there. There's a few more. I don't want to go into the detail of the Semiological project, which is highly relevant, and it's also been kineticized, and it operates on urban architectural interior and furniture scales where the same distinctions reappear, so that the form of your table resonates with the form of your space, and maybe with the position and color in the field, and it could also change in color. Anyway, I think that tectonism generates a whole new layer of expressiveness. And that if it operates expressively, we can bring it in to the metaverse, although we don't need the technological performance, and in the end, we are free to find further algorithms, but also to the extent that this wants to be re-embedded back into the real, these correlations, these kind of affiliations with the physical, going to turn out to be very important, I think. Although you can, so all of the simulations we've been doing are relevant for the metaverse as well. So we're going to run them in the metaverse, generative, design engines, configurators, all of that discourse is relevant for the metaverse, and actually becomes more prevalent first there. And as I said, I mean, we have all these buildings anyway as VR experiences, and I think what will happen is that those clients, many clients who we are designing at the moment for, might want to have those buildings done as virtual environments first, to try them out, to use them, and maybe later on overlay them onto the real. It's not only marketing, but it's also testing and actually utilizing for meetings, for cooperation. Maybe desk space will be not so much prevalent, so these things could be, but what would be prevalent will be socializing spaces, meeting spaces, conferencing spaces, everything but maybe the desk space, which will be relevant and translate over. And the kind of, let's say, the agent-based simulation will be running for the metaverse. And of course, the data collection is easier when you actually have people using metaverse. They will leave trails and tracks, anonymized, most probably. But so we'll get. It's been so hard to get empirical data on space users to calibrate these models. And I think it's going to be easier in the metaverse, and to churn and upgrade and update the design is going to be much, much faster. So I think that will be a huge accelerator for the discipline. For me, this is 100% within our discipline, architecture, as part of a unity of design disciplines, and that virtual design worlds will accelerate our design intelligence and will feed back right into physical spaces. I'm not giving out on physical spaces. As I said, I don't believe that we're going to end up consuming all of that in some kind of hotel room with goggles. We've developed a digital twin of our Beijing office, and we're developing these scenes, these hybrid spaces where where we need big screens, nearly like windows into the virtual world, connecting up, and the same interior projects and expands virtually, and you can sit together. I mean, this is incredibly important because right now, and Zuckerberg was talking about it, everybody's talking about, most, half or more than half of the office is working from home. If you meet together, there shouldn't be second-class citizens. You need to bring them in. So at the moment, we're saying, okay, meetings are only on Zoom, and that is in a way why you actually coming to the office at all. Then you sit separate and looking at Zoom, just so that the remote guys can come in as well. We do that now, hybridize it. We have it on the screen, but then you kind of, the various individuals in that room are not kind of too small. You can't actually see them. The individuals from home are more prominent. I mean, it's to each other than the ones. So there's a lot of lopsided, and there's a lot of problems. And I think the metaverse design will solve that, and we'll bring that home. If that, you see this kind of expansion of spaces and encounters. So we already have multi-user gaming capacity in-house, but we're working with technology companies who give us much more in that direction. I don't want to stay too long here. DRL is working at this at the moment. What would be the screens like? What would be these space expansion like? Virtual, real? How does it look like from those remote participants? How does it look like from those who are co-present? And what kind of experiences? What are the technologies you bring in terms of telepresencing? Screens and projections being one. You have those new kind of caliber of screens which are transparent and can be viewed from both sides. That's kind of fascinating. Holographic projections. Anyway, I don't go into too much detail. In your prominent speakers, joining like this way. Audience is more projected in the background. These kind of mixed mode conditions we're studying, and you know, trying to understand what is the remote experience, what is the experience of those who are co-present. How could that become seamless? How could that be on a nearly equal footing? How can you have infographics overlays so the crowd becomes more legible, particularly in the virtual, where you get additional, you know, spatial graphic enhancement, conspicuity enhancements, etc. Because if you're not there fully, you don't get maybe the auditory track so well. It's not exactly the same. So we need maybe, and also you can abstract further. You can make, you know, outline enhancements. So there will be slightly variations between that that kind of degrees of abstraction potentially in the virtual rendering of those mixed scenes, let's say. Anyway, so this is what DRL is working at the moment on, and this is, you know, these mixed crowds and these projected expansions of the space, and they might also only emerge when people join. They open up these expansions, and they're meant to be designed in a kind of sense of unity where you nearly forget who's physical and who is virtual, and you get a seamless, vivid co-presence. And anyway, so this is the beginning of that topic. In this case, it's not a pure metaverse. It's always working the two aspects. Let's say basically the interface is the real space invested with all these technologies, rather than you know that. Okay, so these are the various incubator projects which are physical, and we're saying we're offering the clients the virtual versions first. All in China, by the way. They're doing all these kind of knowledge hub urban districts, and it's beautiful that they're urban scale districts. I mean, they're not full cities. They're multi-building clusters, and they are. We have the VR models of those. We're developing them. Retail, of course, as well, and smart retail. And just want to end up with the Lieberland metaverse. I know it's been seen before. Just wanted to contrast this with the Decentraland. Central is a kind of the generic grid, and it's, you probably don't know where you are if you're here, here, or here. There's a big problem with actually a persistent urban scene and the intervisibility of events. That's just technology. So the technology has been kind of a bit meager here, and there's I don't think there's a kind of strong field conditions or structure which can orient you, and everything is kind of, there's no curated urban core or anything like this. Well, if anything, there is, I don't know what they're coming up with that Central Plaza. It's a little tiny. It has some you can teleport to various events, and there's a swimming pool. Who knows why they're putting the clouds in? Because you actually can't see what's next to it. You can't. The city is never visible. It's a bit of a letdown. Although it's in many ways a great project and a good example for, because it's decentralized. It's a DAO, crypto based. It has a lot of districts and a lot of buy-in already, but there's a lot of things wrong with it, and we contrasted with what we're trying to do with our Lieberland metaverse. We want to have that city co-presence, intervisibility, which means inter-awareness and navigability, traversability, recognizability of the various pieces, and you're not kind of moving blind and relying on scroll down lists and teleporting, which in a sense defeats the whole idea. Anyway, so Crypto Valley, we said we're focusing on the crypto industry. I mean, it's interesting that I have Crypto Valley, and I don't know how big it really is, and I don't think it mixes well with Vegas and gambling districts or shooting game districts. But they do have it. They have conferencing center for crypto. They have the various crypto projects, building something. I don't know what they're going to use for. There's a lot of advertising. There's, of course, OpenSea NFT museum. You can go in and look at some of those NFTs, click on them and go to OpenSea and purchase one. You don't see many other people. I mean, there's issues which tell us that they can be outdone, not quite quickly. I would say one could surpass them quite quickly with something. And that's what we're saying in terms of Liberland Metaverse investment in Liberland, which is beautiful here. It's actually a real place. It's a beautiful island between Croatia and Serbia, and there's a kind of e-citizenry, and they're all kind of blockchain and crypto enthusiasts, because that's the fusion between libertarian philosophy and thinking and crypto thinking. So that's interesting that you gain some foothold in through that purchase of the virtual land. You get some stake into the real land, should it ever become the Free Republic of Liberland. Focus on the crypto ecosystem, networking, not entertainment, B2B, but also conferencing, and I guess universities will with all these kind of new crypto lectures and courses might join up here. And then of course the focus on architectural design. It's not all user generated initially, although there will be a lot of space for user generated or land sales and coming in with your own architects. But we design core spaces, core plazas, urban spaces where you have that intervisibility and openness, and you can move in. You don't have to, you can move in quicker and be there and be present. And while we decided to, and we think it's going to be blockchain based and be a DAO, it's not only a funding route, but it is a legitimacy. There's open source, open platform, contributors, maybe that governance structure, rather than having Facebook or Meta governing that. Even if it's open, let's say inviting a lot of contributors, the governance will be proprietary systems. And I believe here that there's more legitimacy and credibility with if the governance is more of an open, emergent, evolving thing where the contributors who invest will be coming in. And so it's some kind of interesting democracy of the invested. I believe that's much stronger and will probably has a better chance than maybe a proprietary system, even if that comes initially with a lot of power. I think in the end, an open source community is difficult to compete with a single company. So that's what I believe. And again, like we're saying, we kind of leading it initially, we curating and designing spaces. We have a configurator where you can first degree of, let's say, contributors and user content coming through. And then as we just sketched out the urban core, as we build this out, there will be a lot more freedom and a lot more, let's say, initiative. But once we set the scene, once we set this as crypto ecosystem, and maybe expands into, educational related NFT and art scenes, digital art scenes. And once we give it a certain gist, I think that will then accumulate, and it could be pretty permissionless, and anybody who would want to come in would want for these co-location centers. It would be a waste to buy here to have a casino, because these people here who gather here have nothing to do with gambling or shooting games. So I think if one initiates it, then the kind of self-organized, a path-dependent, if you chart the initial direction, a path-dependent trajectory for generating a unique identity spontaneously through a spontaneous order can be initiated with that initially sponsored order, let's say. And that's what I'm talking about, modes of governance, sponsored, self-governed, spontaneous. Don't want to repeat that because I've lectured on it before, just give you some glimpses of the various spaces we've designed and how we designed them. Look, it's the second iteration. We have to do much more work. There's a certain homogeneity already. We need to build in more kind of systematic semiology. There isn't yet much the density, and that will evolve. I mean, I think the second or third iteration, as it builds up, the owners and also we as managing the central core, we will substitute these buildings with larger buildings. Maybe they become more proximate. Maybe they start to intersect, etc. It's just first glimpse of something we believe in, and of course you don't need necessarily columns. I've said take all the columns out, but still we have gravity as an orienting device, and we have ground surface as a privileged datum, and then multiple you can work below and above that, but you go back to kind of an orienting datum, etc. Anyway, I don't want to emphasize that and repeat it too much, so I click through that. The diversity of spaces, and it's just one small design team generating a first iteration. See the power of computational design coming through, of tectonism, the richness of repertoires we have, but it is, it becomes monotonous already, a bit of self-critique here, even though we have a little variety, but we also don't want chaos. We want to have, unity across diversity, unity of principle, unity of resonances, of affiliations, and they can come in even with multiple authors. So I believe that very, very prominently, and we start to sketch out interaction scenarios and situations, etc. And well, I mean, I just wanted to end with that this is a kind of low density version, and the multi-species ecology was also, you can kind of have algorithms, various swarms of species intersecting, interpenetrating, layering, and then each new author comes in with a whole new swarm or intervention or building as a microcosm of what's going around. And that is an experiment we did with AADRL recently for the new London. And I also think maybe some metaverse can just kind of use real spaces, Lieberland, maybe, this is this is bridging between the city of London, which I love, and Canary Wharf, which I love less. But in terms of a kind of high density financial industry, but not only financial creative industry hub, we can see what we've done with the principle of tectonism and high density and layeredness, and for high density, a tower city is not so bad because you see towers, you see destinations, rooftops, mid-level events, etc. There's more elevational intervisibility potentially. So I can see something like this also being a version of the metaverse. But again, like every city, maybe you start, you're not gonna, if Lieberland would start, with 3 towers, you would have everything we've rolled out at the moment. So that's not the rule. But then, principles of morphogenesis, why not? Because they give coherency and legibility and intervisibility, if you like. And so that's another version. And so in a sense, reinterpreting a lot of what we've been doing and say that's relevant for the metaverse. Where you can switch view, you move to the atrium, and suddenly you see 20 other events, and then you pull back again, and you see only a smaller subset. A screen pulls away, and you get the depths of a multi-layered event, and you switch between different types. You come together in one group, and then you pull away for the workshop in little subgroups, and then you kind of join again together in the socializing and after party or whatever. I mean, so these scenarios I can imagine. And the beauty here is, of course, that we can, in the metaverse, we might be flying sometimes be more ground-oriented. But the 3D city is going to be a city of flight. Why not? With that, I'm happy to take questions, or we start the debate.
Thank you so much, Patrik. That was awesome. Really cool. So while we're waiting for questions to materialize, I'm just going to ask people in the audience to post your questions in the Q&A box or even through the chat. I just wanted to kick off with something that you said at a certain point, where the interface of the internet is kind of at a crisis point. And previously in other talks that you've given, you've also made that remark about urbanism in general. We're kind of at this crisis point where we sort of have what you're calling a garbage spill urbanism. And so my question is, as part of your third thesis, that the VR empowered cyberspace implies radical transformation of the built architecture and urban life. I just wanted to kind of ask you how the metaverse is, or how designing in the metaverse could start to influence how we design and build in real life. It's kind of a big frame question, but I was wondering if you can if you can try to articulate that, and specifically as related maybe to this evolution of the semiological project into the metaverse and then back out into real life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're thinking it through now for a number of weeks already at AADRL. So basically, I mean, and we see it in our real life experience, we're going to be in mixed mode a lot. And so we need to generate that. I mean, any premise, and every corporate, every firm, every institution, and university, and a think tank, a museum, shop, retailer will have a virtual space, like they now have a website and a Facebook page. They will have venues, and they have multiple venues around the world. You know, I don't know how many Apple stores there are, but you know, and so these things will necessarily have something to do with it. So so first of all, these virtual spaces and the real spaces, and every single human being, corporate, we always inhabit both. And there shouldn't be a schizophrenic kind of, you know, schism. So the designers, and that's why I don't believe they kind of specialists. There needs to be those designers there will be unity of design, capturing those, but then also inside there will be that hybridity. So it's not that the virtual is kind of separate. And as I said, I don't believe that you're going to experience the virtual by sitting lonely at your desk in the office staring at your PC or at home in the goggles, but that you will be with a group of people in the meeting, and then you kind of have, you know, let's say the Beijing and the London office are fusing, or the remote workers who are coming in, you know, every once or two times a week maximum, will fuse with those with a co-presence. And in the office, you will have a kind of spectrum, a gradient from those spaces which are more, you know, where there's less infusion of projection screens and holographs. There will be more kind of, you know, physical, where you could sit down at your desk, etc. And then there will be those which are mixed with an equal proportion. It's also how many remote and how many physical co-presence will be there. And then those spaces which are full on VR space, that is nearly like you don't see anymore. The physical is less prevalent, and you like stepping into a cave, but maybe with a number of people. And I've seen images of a panoramic screen and surrounding an office space. It's quite fascinating what you get. So that's and then you have the infographics, which will be bleeding, which will be layered, and we will get used to. And then they can be followed back into the real, because you can have LED dot matrices, you can have, you know, you have AR overlay. So I think that there's an interesting fusion, and the kinetic transformation I was talking about. And also the semiology, as it will be foregrounded, I think we're going to learn to work on that. And I think graphic designers are more into it. I mean, a lot of it is intuitive as well, but because it's the foreground, that's the problem, is legibility and tractability, which font you use for headlines, cursive, you know, even on that level where you know, all of that legibility and tractability discourse when you lay out a complex page. I mean, so it's still the same discourse, and that's what we will be driving a lot of the cyberspaces, the pure cyberspaces. So I think that the themes I've been having will be distilled out, and then the same designers who have acquired that repertoire, that these criteria, these design drivers, they will realize that the same design drivers will apply into the real. Now we're oblivious to this. And I think the critical discourse will come through. So in the end, it's, you know, it's clear that the metaverse is going to be parametricism, particularly if it has its dynamic conditions, if it has gradients, if it has the need to maintain legibility in the face of let's say complexity. You need actually convexity and smooth continuation, etc. So I just believe that this will be a push, and so that these themes become more prominent. And I actually get good resonances from the world of let's say metaverse invest people, that they read my writings, listen to my lectures. And they get it, because I think it's more, there's less distraction through, let's say, cost of construction and the idea of constructability and all those worries. Is it enough space, quantitative rather than qualitative, which still dominate the real estate world. So I think there's this distillation is going to be the main one key driver to bring our messages home, and then we will apply them naturally to the real environment. Particularly, that real environment needs to be designed together with the virtual environment.
So together with that, so for a long time, you've been describing kind of the parametricism process of evolving cities, sort of like a co-evolution, more spontaneous, more ground up. And I mean, you talked about it in terms of the responsive environments project that has been going on for so long. And so lately you're calling it the self-directed spontaneous environments. But how can you relate that to something like the centralization versus decentralization of a platform like Meta, and how does that really interface with new possibilities for kind of entrepreneurial, more ground up kinds of initiatives?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think in the first phase of this, I think with the moment the city itself is so frozen up with respect to land use plans, zoning laws, NIMBYism and protecting strict rules, because it's absolutely frozen up and paralyzed. And of course, for the metaverse, it's not. It's all fluid, it's all open, and these are all entrepreneurial ventures, whether they are proprietary or whether they are initially entrepreneurial and then become, let's say, DAOs. They're still they don't have that heavy load of history and of they're actually growing, and you can offer something, invite people are voting with their feet and switching between platforms. You don't have that heavy lock-in that you have moved to the city and you've purchased that apartment, and now you're gonna be dig your heels in, that nobody else next door, nothing will change. So we don't have all of that. So in that sense, that whole idea, what I call, let's say, the formation of the real market discovery of co-location synergies and forging these network relationships, that things can become close together where they most want each other, need each other, complement each other. Whereas in a city, that's very difficult. I mean, because there is this building next to it, you would want to build maybe your hostel next to the university, but there's not possible. And you have to locate somewhere else, and then you have to commute and all of that. So I think there's going to be much more dynamism, and that's why it's fascinating. I mean, it will be that initial flourishing of experimenting with, modes, with planning regimes, with modes of ordering. The way I've discussed it, it's not going to be the best thing to right away have spontaneous early, because at the early there's a lot of mistakes, and that also takes time, particularly if they kind of dig in. And of course, you can later be substituted for. There's a market, so somebody who has a better idea can then pay more. So there is enough fluidity, and even in something like the central land, I believe in that. So even the spontaneous order, because the churning is much faster than in reality, and the openness is going to be relatively unrestricted. They can also evolve, even if there's initially maybe somebody has land bank, somebody has done something, put things down, which now kind of make it, hard to change direction. I do still believe it's much more fluid and open. So I'm looking very much forward. I'm starting to study what are the different, let's say, planning rules and processes and governance processes that structure these growth processes in meaningful ways. I'm very curious about it. I have my ideas about it. I've written about it, but it's also you need to watch and see it. And therefore, it's incredibly important that we have, these 10, 20, 30 metaverses trying similar things, and observe how they do it and what the failings are, what the problems are, and also remain very flexible and open-minded about it. And I think that every time there's a new kind of industry, there's going to be that field of experimentation, and that's exciting. And I think that will feed back into the urban. If these become models, beautiful, navigable, complex, they have identity rather than being kind of generic, pollutions which all look the same in the end. Maybe that becomes, and then we have markets and discourses. We will discuss it. We will explain it. We will have that. We can go back to the urban, and there will be some cities which will benefit from that technology transfer the other direction. Now it's a kind of analogical transference of, our inbuilt knowledge about cities and navigation and inhabiting spaces that fuels this. But I think there will be the counter flow will come soon enough.
So can I ask you to please just stop your screen from sharing so we can see you better? Because
sorry.
It's okay.
Yeah, it makes sense.
So this is kind of a separate question having to do with the actual theme of this year's biennial, which is the available city. And this theme of this biennial stems from the biennial artistic director's long-standing project to find city-owned empty lots in Chicago. And he has found something like almost 15,000 of them, which is an astonishing amount of kind of vacant space that is sitting there in various communities across the city. And if you added it all up, it would be the size of the central business district of Chicago. And so with regard to that, what he's trying to activate is kind of a project via the biennial where various contributors are brainstorming about what can happen with these community spaces to activate the communities, to activate sort of a network of spaces throughout the city that somehow relate to each other. And so I guess my question is, how would you kind of summarize what you would talked about in terms of how you might activate these empty spaces in various communities in Chicago, some of which are, very economically depleted communities without a lot of kind of economic funds or incentive. How would you activate some of these ideas in those communities? And how could that possibly start in the metaverse?
Yeah, I don't know why let's say what the issues are, why these lots are empty, why they've been empty for a long time, why certain districts might be depleted, whatever. I mean, that background knowledge I don't have. So I don't know. My suspicion is that some of the non-utilization might be politically. That's difficult to get a license, or that the land use is somehow misdirected. I don't know enough about it. What we discussed, remember that maybe what we could do at one point is create a window into a virtual space to make a cyber urban plaza. I mean, we also believe that a lot of these interfaces into the virtual will be urban outdoor, gathering spaces where virtual and audience can come together. So that's one way. I mean, of course, it has to be in the right place. It really is. I lack the knowledge of what the issue is with various spots, but in a metropolis like Chicago, where you actually have an urban renaissance, where people, and now trying to move back to the city, I would expect that would there be sufficient freedom to acquire and utilize these spaces, one would see such utilization. So that's just my intuition, because it's not only Chicago, it's more major cities. You have that, we had that kind of suburbanization, and now you have the kind of urban regeneration, urban renaissance, where people try to be close in the city. I mean that was pre-COVID, and I think it's going to be post-COVID too. I still believe that, despite the emergence of the metaverse, as I said, for me, it's more of a kind of mixed reality condition. And I believe there's a lot of good reasons and a lot of motivation to be in the city and be mingling and mixing in that mixed mode and in the physical mode.
Yeah, I mean, the question actually, I probably phrased it wrong. I didn't mean what you would do specifically in the scenario in Chicago, but it's kind of a prevalent problem in other cities too. You have this sort of hyperdensity where everything is happening.
I would auction them. All of them in one huge auction.
And I mean, when you talk about kind of the
privatize more.
When you talk about kind of a rule-based idea of urban design, I mean...
No, I mean, auctioning means also that, of course, NGOs and charities and individuals and corporates and anybody can buy them for what they're worth. You know, and if there are 15,000 of them, then maybe you can do it in tranches. You know, but if you get some of them for $1, I would go for that. But maybe then with a mandate to do something. I mean, that's another thing. You say it reverts back for $1 if you haven't done anything in a year.
So, yeah, I mean, you talk about sort of rule-based design, and I think people think of rules in different ways. And I think...
So do you accept the idea of the auction? I'm just curious.
Do I accept it? I think it would be a great boost to a lot of these communities to be able to have this land even leased, you know, for a long lease period to be developed, you know, by, you know, maybe startups, maybe entrepreneurial developers, to just kind of stimulate the various neighborhoods. So this is kind of a big problem in Chicago, but I think it's a big problem in a lot of cities. But the next question I wanted to ask you, which is kind of tied to this, when you talk about kind of rule-based design, I think people have different conceptions of rules. And I mean, people that I've had conversations with about parametricism kind of critique the movement as kind of having kind of a homogeneous one-hand design. And you've talked about that a lot today, about how that is not necessarily how it has to manifest. But the kinds of rules that exist in actual, you know, city development, like zoning regulations, in some cases outmoded restrictions that have to do with codes. I mean, that's a whole set of layer of rules that really inhibits a certain kind of rule-based design that you're talking about. And I'm just wondering, like, where we begin in transforming that. Like, what are the things that could possibly transform this idea that we need heavy zoning restrictions and certain rules that actually almost pre-design buildings for architects?
Yeah, that's a big problem. I mean, actually in London, the bigger problem is even the discretion of planners, because that throws in uncertainty and a kind of strange negotiation process. So in that respect, I prefer a system of strict rules. I mean, the problem is, of course, if the rules are contradicting viability and they're prohibiting creative synergy discoveries, then there's a big problem. I mean, I talk in parameters, so I use the phrase rule-based when I talk about the planning regimes, and I do accept that there could be one option of the sponsored order. But when I talk about parametricism and rule-based design, is something very different. Namely, that's the idea that one, instead of having intuitive, individually kind of sculpted, let's say, solutions, I mean, that's sometimes always necessary, sometimes necessary to some extent, that one builds algorithms and builds in where various performance criteria and environmental influences are registered, and that you generate a parametric model or component sensitive to these context inputs in these dependency networks, and then you can kind of you can distribute or let these things seed. That's the person's sort of urbanism condition, dependency on slope and dependency on where you are on in the overall, let's say, center or peripheral conditions, sun, etc. You have a number of parameters which are then driving volume, driving fenestration, deriving, courtyard configuration, etc. And you put that in and you can proliferate. And then this kind of auto-adaptation, auto-fitting gets a lot of beautiful results. And of course, there could be many, many different ways. You know, each species in the world of multi-species ecologies, plant, animal, they have their own set of algorithms through which they adapt and find their niche and have symbiotic and reactions to all the other species. So it's not only the general environment conditions, like I was talking about, topography, sun direction, closest to the river, or geometric location, but once it has been going, there's also those textures, fabrics, buildings which are already there. You can then say, okay, I'm this whatever I'm putting my 20 kind of instantiations of that, let's say that co-working hub, I'm going to also recognize the Empire State Building, and I will always orient towards it. I mean, maybe that's in it, and it will always be magnetizing everything of it. So all other sets of species you host, you become kind of hosts, hooks for the next set of algorithms, and this is where it becomes an interesting path-dependent build-up of absolutely unique identities. So if you do this, each site has already a unique condition, topography. I mean, they're similar, but then there's an historical building, then there's this and that, but then you have the freedom. The various authors come in. All I'm demanding, in inverted commas, that they should be sophisticated enough to be parametricism, tectonism literate, and then the rest is creative invention. Which algorithms, which rules, through which principles and scripts, let's say they develop. All I'm asking, do it right in this way, ideally, because then you have principles and you go to criticize. You rerun it with a new script, and then somebody else comes in and scripts on top for what you've put down. And this way, you can guarantee you that no city, no district, and it could be a district, and each district is slightly different, but they have some things they share. So that there's, first of all, I would believe uniqueness, meaning urban identity, what everybody's craving. And at the same time, there is local unity. And there is also something which is, all of them will be 21st century. So that's what I believe. And we have in terms of our perceptual cognitive potentials, we have a kind of supercomputer here, which is highly gestalt sensitive. And we can recognize these differences. So that will be legible to us. That's what I believe. Now, that's rule-based in the way which is, let's say, a principle of parametricism /tectonism, which of course is hard to do. And we then, but you can always do better. You can always put in yet another, let's say, dependency factor in, superimpose it. It's getting harder and harder to do it. And you can improve on that, but that's the kind of heuristics by which we can really upgrade our skills and capabilities. And in this way, it becomes very individualist and creative, because these rules will be written, they're not generic. There are, each author will be an author of scripts, of rules, but the fact that he is desiring to make resonances, affiliations, and therefore in chief embedding with respect to things which came before, that fact alone guarantees something about the overall coherency, and that means that he is on the level of, let's say, parametricism, tectonism. He is a sophisticated 21st century architect, and those who don't understand this and don't have the skills, in a way they are not sophisticated 21st century architects. They're not at the height of their own discipline. And that's the problem of our discipline. It's so fragmented and therefore in large parts backward, even refusing to accept that there's kind of global best practices. We should at least debate and argue. And this makes our discipline so kind of different to more, let's say, coherent and mature disciplines, let's say like medicine, for instance. And of course, at the fringe side, there's also a lot of, let's say, voodoo and so-called alternative and obfuscation and so on, but there's still a core disciplinary understanding that you have now tailored therapy, you have gene therapy, you have data driven, the science is more sophisticated, and similarly is we can talk similarly about other disciplines like economics and finance and so on. It remains controversial in many ways, but it's not like architecture where you have these utter fragmentation and whole swaths or whole parts of the field is relatively oblivious to where I argue the frontier of the discipline is, and can be very self-confident in let's say taking a stance which I consider to be backward. Anyway, so that's a problem which I've been always arguing about, and the Metaverse will also have this problem if the discipline isn't living up to it. But my hope is that the selection criteria, let's say the architects who gravitates towards the Metaverse are those which are digitally native more. There will be the young architects. So I think that there is going to be a natural bias. Let's say I don't believe that the Metaverse is also going to be full of kitsch and postmodernism and all of that. But I think the bits of the Metaverse which I care about, which is the sophisticated, let's say, knowledge economy metaverses, my hunch is that parametricism, although not being hegemonic in that, will have a much bigger weight in that space than it has in architecture today. I think I have reason to believe that, and maybe that we are early kind of mover in the space will have an influence too. But I can also see it. If I look around at the various metaverses, not the kitsch toy town metaverses, but the professionally oriented virtual environments, I can see our influence is incredibly strong. Parametricism is way more prevalent there than any random snapshot of a city is, like London, where it's actually minuscule or absent.
So as I'm still waiting for people to chime in, if you guys can't post in the Q&A box, feel free to just post via chat or raise your hand.
So it's a great opportunity for parametricism to break through and become dominant.
So another question, this kind of came up initially. Robert Newmeyer, who's one of your other PhD students, invited me to a review for a class that he's teaching, and that was focused on kind of AI processes and designs of facades. And so almost everybody there was very deeply steeped into AI. And I think I was kind of like the shocking alternative person that was talking about like blockchain and the metaverse and everything we've been talking about over the last 18 months, and that you and Shege have been talking about at AADRL. And also through a conversation with Shege, I realized there's really kind of a very big sort of difference between kind of the process of inventing with AI, in which you have to like strongly train the AI. And of course you have things that emerge that you don't expect, but there's still a very strong controlled kind of centralized thing. And then on the other end of the spectrum, what happens through blockchain with NFTs and kind of the way that these metaverses evolve through blockchain and the participatory nature of it. It's almost like, my question is really how those can be merged, because there's such strong affinities on a certain level and also strong disjunctions.
I mean, the interesting thing is, if you sample random architecture or urban plans now, you're just going to reproduce, and you feed that into a neural network, you just reproduce a garbage in, garbage out, right? So I mean, there's some degree of rationality, but it's certainly not for designerly consumption, I mean, in the right way. I mean, that's not what's happening. And then, of course, you can do style transfers, you get interesting hybridization and surprises. I mean, what I believe in is what actually, what Curve Himmelblau is doing, and we're going to do the same. Actually, we're starting a collaboration with Refik Anadol. And let's say if we feed the machine with our own repertoire, with our own best examples, and we have a huge catalog, and let's see what comes out there. Then you capture rationality. Maybe we can facilitate we have an incredible internal repertoire over 25 years of still relevant examples, and we can focus the later ones. We can reinforce them more heavily. So huge diversity. Anyway, that's what we're going to do. So you need to have the good data set, and I think, and it could also be, the data set of all the parametricism and tectonism project, the best ones. That's what you should feed into these machines, and that's what we're starting to do. And that becomes some kind of a shape grammar engine, and we can use it to simulate ourselves, because that's what my supercomputer here is doing as well. I mean, I'm kind of spinning our internal repertoire and else what I've seen of colleagues and innovators and so on, and try to see that and apply that, and shape project, So I think we can machine help for that. So I believe in this to some extent. Unfortunately, it's still, even if it's only 2D, it could still work. And then what we then get is some kind of 2D images we can then kind of reverse engineer into 3D. Eventually becomes 3D. But so I believe in that for us as a self-enhancement engine, and maybe then you can put mutational tweaks in there. Or what if I always, what I said, okay, I love what we're doing, but actually I need kind of 20% of Ross love growth. And I need, I put in much more, let's say, look at all the Achim Menger's work, and because we haven't, for us, the tectonism isn't foregrounded enough, so we interject, but it's a very strategic interjection. So we have that on the horizon. And in the first iteration, we're gonna, Refik has a fantastic kind of team, and he's recently made some good. Get some fuel through NFTs. So that's really the first iteration of that. But that's what it has to be. It has to be a rational, and you have to also set the criteria. It has to have the data set has to have a certain qualities you're trying to retrieve and then reproduce or merge. But I wouldn't do that with the current cityscapes.
So we have the first question from somebody who goes by the initials KL. I would like to ask Mr. Schumacher to explain why parametric design, optimizing spaces, interactions, and usage looks similar to Star Wars design.
Oh, wow, God. No, I don't think it does, but I'm not so familiar with Star Wars, so I will look it up and let you know, but I don't believe it does so much. But I do find, it's interesting. So what we've been doing for so long. I don't know, recent iterations. There's been a lot of percolation, a lot of influences flying out into the world. That probably not everybody knows where these influences are coming from. So that was an amazing innovator on many fronts. So, but also, of course, there's other influences come. It's bi-directional, intuitive. Particularly, it's not all designed by us. So we have 500 people who some of them might be Star Wars fans, and if that flows in, I mean, I might not even notice it. I might say yes, go with that. But you'll have to send me the image.
And we have another question from a gentleman named Harith Al-Saidi. And he says, when you transform space topological aspects to your own vision of user mindset, how can you anticipate the over-controlled environment can impact users' behavior in the urban city? There may be a little translation issue here, but I'm
not sure of over-controlled. I mean, the idea is that the complex variegated order, which I'm hoping which will emerge. I mean, of course, each designer has to make a complex institutional building. There will be many parts, and you're trying to orchestrate in a way that empowers users, so that they understand where they are, that all the offerings on the spatial structure become transparent, navigable. So you don't rely on lists and teleporting, or continuously looking between the first person and the map. And so this is, and in a way I suspect that the economic pressure and the user let's say, density and so on some of these spaces will be so much higher than a normal physical space. And it's easier to track where people roamed around and if they made loops and meaningless journeys, and also where they looked, where they clicked. I mean, that's now with websites. There's a whole analytics of the high commercial value websites, where this is analyzed and updated and so on. So that kind of thing will eventually feed back. And of course, we need to be smart and sophisticated enough to absorb this user. It's a post-occupancy stream of data. How do you inflect that back to improving the design? And in this sense, you will have an evolving design which is hopefully informed by evidence of usage, of utility ultimately. I mean, these should be high performance environments, and the high performance if users get a lot of done, a lot of interaction, a lot of satisfaction, and sometimes that it's the easiest case if that translates into revenue, if it was a sales venue, but it might also be otherwise, other metrics would come through. Yeah, very soon.
So I'm wondering, as we're waiting for more questions, we had a guest in the symposium in the first session, Tubador from Metaverse Fund, and he talked about the metaverse in terms of being like a sandbox on steroids. And I'm thinking of all the agendas that you outlined in the second volume of the Auto Places of Architecture kind of design agendas. What would be some agendas that you would tell people about, either students or professionals here, that might emerge in the metaverse as sort of an experiment initially that would be much more expensive and almost impossible to do in real life? Like, what kinds of experiments would you
one thing I was just mentioned, post-occupancy, another one I mentioned earlier, which is, let's say, genetic transformability and adaptiveness. I mean, adaptiveness, responsiveness, but also spontaneous. I mean, if something isn't utilized, then this I mean, that's the way we've developed our agent models as well. Or we in the next stage we can actually we measure utilization of a space or a piece of furniture in entrances whenever used. So then you either they die off, or they wiggle, they inflate, they roam around and find a place where they get better utilized. So you get these kind of and that's kind of something you can imagine to have in real space, where you have robotic pieces who have learning capacities, and they roam around and continuously trying to upgrade their utilization, because that's what they're driven to do. And so that's things like that, where you have basically autonomous agents who are roaming around with utility functions, and with the aim to increase the utilization. That's another mechanism, I think, which is very potent, and that feeds directly into a that would be kind of auto optimization during utilizations of the piece. Of course, you have to set it up this way, but that's something which I can foresee for, and the investment, of course, is difficult to pull this off, and but the pressure, the amount of investment, I mean, Zuckerberg was talking about 10 billion, and I know another company, 1,000 people on this project, 10,000 people on this project, money, these things are possible, and they're way out of, let's compare that to, ZHA code, whatever, we're having maybe 20 people and 3-4 research teams, a total of 30 people, researchers, but they're not all focused on that. So and then I don't know who else in architecture is doing this. So I think that metaverse pressure, investment, intelligence will bring these upgrades, and will bring these ideas we have been talking about, like we're talking about cyberspace for many years. Let's say these kind of self-learning, machine learning, self-optimizing environments, they can become a reality I think because graphic websites to some extent are doing that, but the same will apply to cyberspaces. Listen, I'm running out of time. I allow for one more question.
Okay, and we have one more question. One second. Okay. And the question is Liberland project more focused on being a role model for decentralized states or on connection of the metaverse to the real world?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I mean, we don't know yet. I mean, it's both. I think there's a beautiful coincidence. As I said earlier, the metaverse is inherently freer because you don't have, politicians, telling you and land use rules and restrictions, and that's one thing. So you're out of the gate with many more degrees of freedom, and then you can also invent your governance structures, participatory structures, decision-making structures, and tweak and try them. And at the same time, it's meant, Liberland is imagining in the real world where we have more dimensions of regulation, where we also have to, more dimensions of life, and how that could be structured with more degrees of freedom, and how you have, an evolving law within that, and that these things overlap, and one feeding back into the other is beautiful. So we were talking earlier, the general coincidence of and layering of metaverse and real city, that could be exemplary here. Now we all have to support VIT and the Liberland community and put pressure on Croatia and Serbia, in particular Croatia, to not say simply no and leave that piece of land unutilized, a backwater at the border, like borderlands are usually. And so that's the thing. Obviously, if Liberland isn't happening, then, but it's still, what is beautiful, we still can think it through, because there is a project. There's not only the Metaverse team, there's actually the Liberland governance and political team, let's say, and economic team, and we starting to work together. And there is these two kind of layers of governance. So at least at the theoretical project, that is an interesting dialogue, and how much we can learn from the metaverse. What, we later on the metaverse might get restrictions. Let's say if they're hosted in the US and they want to address US audiences. And the good thing about metaverse is they're borderless. But if the US market is still kind of major, so if there's a kind of heavy-handedness in restricting metaverse interactions, but still, then Liberland might not care and might keep going. And so the degrees of freedom which we need at the moment, there seems to be, I mean, there's no metaverse is totally outside the purview at the moment. I mean, until you try something, you'll find out what the pushback might be.
I want to thank you so much for doing the talk, and also for staying so long for doing Q&A. And this has been another session of the ArchAgenda Debates for the Chicago Architecture Biennial 2021. And we'll see you in the metaverse, Patrik.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Where else?
Okay.
Okay. Bye, guys.
Thank you. And